This tutorial section will discuss the creation of the digital terrain model. The Terrain and Site module includes more than 50 functions, but this tutorial will only include the creation and modification of the terrain entity. To create DTM, we need a terrain drawing with elevation data. This means that the elevation points and contour lines of the drawing require elevation in their properties. Before making any modifications to the terrain file, we need to save a backup copy of the file. Firstly, we need to generate a terrain file and select the file path. Click Create Terrain command, enter the name of the terrain file. The system will save the terrain file in the project folder by default, and click OK. Click the Extract Elevation Points command. Now we need to select the objects with elevation data. Before clicking anything, press S to open the search settings window. You can avoid abnormal scatters and contours by setting the minimum and maximum elevation. Click a contour line, and the system will search and extract all the objects in the same layer. So it is highly recommended to keep different objects in different layers. Click on an elevation point that needs to be extracted. If elevation points are in blocks with elevation data, we choose by block point Z in the Select Attribute Name window. If the block point does not have elevation data, you can choose by name. The system will extract the name of the block as its elevation data, but the name must be a number. When you select all the elevation points, press Enter to finish. Now, all the objects you just selected will be moved to the extracting terrain layer. Click the Build Terrain command to generate the terrain entity according to the elevation points we just extracted. The terrain entity file is saved as a mesh file in the project folder by default. The system will automatically search the model mesh and create the boundary. You can also create the DTM with the Import DWG file command. Same with the Extract Elevation Point command. We need to enter the terrain name. Then, we can see the Import Terrain Data from external DWG window. Select the terrain DWG file and set the content of each layer with elevation data. For example, set the content as contour for contour and index contour layer. Set the content as a terrain point for the elevation point layer. After finishing settings, click OK. Now all the data points are collected from the DWG file. Then we need to build terrain again to create the DTM. Now, we will introduce the terrain entity modification. Here, we find some missing contours and elevation points. We need to add them to the terrain entity. Double-click the terrain entity to edit the terrain property. In this window, you can set the display parameters for the terrain, such as display mode, contour interval and color for each element. There are 9 different types of display modes. We can set it into boundary mode to check the integrity of the terrain boundary. To add contours and point to the terrain model, we can use the Add Points and Contours command. Select the terrain entity first, then select the contour that needs to be added. Because these contours' elevations are over the effective range, we need to change the elevation data range. After that, by ticking the searching curves in the same layer, the system can find all the objects in the same layer. Click OK to finish. Repeat the command to include the rest contours and points in the terrain model. Now, we need to search the terrain boundary again. Click the Search Boundary command under the Boundary Definition tools. The system will search and generate the terrain boundary again. Now, we can switch the display mode back to the triangulation mode to double-check whether the terrain entity is correct or not. The contour is another commonly used display mode. You can set the contour interval by the complexity of your terrain model. The advantage of this mode is You can see both the contour map and other drawing elements, such as water features, buildings, power lines, and others. EICAD has a built-in 3D terrain viewing tool. Select the terrain entity. In the right-click menu, select View 3D Terrain to view the entity in the terrain editor. Here you can show and hide the mesh, elevation points, contour lines, and surfaces. You can modify elevation points and contours with the viewing editing tools or press V on the keyboard. Select the contour or elevation point. You can edit the elevation value and click Rebuild to modify the terrain entity. After the modification, save and exit the editor, and the terrain will automatically update. The terrain file is saved in the project folder as well. You can view and edit it anytime. Now we have finished the creation of our digital terrain model and are ready to move to the horizontal alignment design.